This week, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, which is tasked with driving transformation of the financial sector and promoting fair treatment of financial customers, amongst others, held a conference looking at some of the gains made over the years. Stakeholders discussed issues of critical importance, such as trust between financial institutions and South Africans, which is somewhat compromised. Earlier this week, I sat down with the Commissioner of the FSCA and filed this report. We are in conversation with the Commissioner, and that's Mr. Unathi Kamlana of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Mr. Kamlana, a very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Perhaps we can start with the mandate of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority.
All right. Thank you very much for having us. So the FSCA is responsible for ensuring that financial customers are treated fairly by financial institutions. That's the primary part of our mandate. In addition to that, though, we are also responsible for market integrity. So we are responsible for capital markets regulation and oversight. And thirdly, we are responsible for providing financial education to South Africans. So those are the three main components of the mandate of the FSCA.
So when you speak of making sure that customers are treated fairly, that would be the average South African, so myself and Jablani, for instance.
Yes. So all financial customers, in terms of all of the kind of products that they have with financial institutions, whether it is a policy or a deposit in a bank or a unit trust with a collective investment scheme, all types of financial customers. We are responsible for their fair treatment by financial institutions.
And how do you measure that? How would you characterize how financial customers are being treated in South Africa?
So, at the core of our regulatory framework is a framework that we refer to as Treating Customers Fairly, TCF framework. That TCF framework has got certain principles around, for example, disclosure, quality of advice that customers are entitled to, information that they should be provided with in terms of recourse if they are not happy, information that they should be provided with in terms of pricing of the products and services that they access from financial institutions. And to answer your question specifically around how we measure that, we supervise financial institutions and we supervise them against that framework of treating customers fairly so that they can have an understanding of whether there are gaps in how they treat their customers. And then we work together with financial institutions to close those gaps. What we are interested in, and this is an important point, that's a point of change in approach in the last couple of years by the FSCA, which is that it's not about just compliance with rules. It is about outcomes. It's about how customers themselves provide feedback to financial institutions about how they are treated. Because you can have a long list of rules and a tick box approach. And that's not really the interest of the FSCA. We're interested in outcomes and being much more forward-looking about changes that customers are experiencing. One of the things that we talk about, for example, in the context of the high cost of living in South Africa, is vulnerable customers and how financial institutions should be responsive to the changes, such as customers being more vulnerable given the high cost of living. So that's how we measure. That's how we do our work as supervisors.
Sure. You had the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Lisicha Kganyago, speaking to that issue of trust, right? And pointing to really a dent that has sort of characterized the relationship of trust between South Africans and financial institutions, referencing the entire Rand manipulation scandal. He went as far as saying that public trust in the financial system is not as deep as it needs to be. What has the FSCA actually picked up around this issue?
So, I think it's an important point that the Governor was making. And I think actually what he was saying was the facts, as were argued even at the Competition Appeals Court, on what had happened, did not really point to a grand scheme of financial institutions undermining the value of the rand. However, the public discourse actually assumed that something had gone wrong because there was unethical conduct that was alleged in terms of the traders in the private rooms, the chat rooms, where they were discussing specific trades. I think the issue there is about information. It is about how financial institutions have to step up to communicate in much more clear and transparent ways with the public, with financial customers, in terms of what is the governance arrangements that exist in financial institutions which prevent unethical behavior or deal with it if it is detected.
Other sectors of the population where you find that there are people, financial literacy also, a lack of financial literacy, which is what you're speaking to, has also been pointed to as being a problem. For how much longer will it be?
So one of the changes, this is part of the Twin Peaks changes, which was implemented in 2018 in South Africa, was to actually formalize financial education, the provision of financial education, as a key mandate of the FSCA. And this was done because in the past this was left to financial institutions themselves. But now we are required to collaboratively, yes, work with financial institutions to ensure that they've got financial education programs that pertain to the products and services that they offer. And we not only work with them in providing that information, but also to assess the quality of the information that's provided. Because our interest, of course, is that it is essential and relevant information, not necessarily marketing information.
Are financial institutions immune to corruption or manipulation? Because when you speak of public perception and trust, there has been also in the news more recently, a few weeks ago, I beg your pardon, where it was said a specific bank was discriminatory or applied discriminatory practices to a certain sector of the population. And so when you hear such things, and we speak about public education and we speak about the misconceptions in the public space, what do we need to understand about that?
Sure. So I think this is the point I'm making about the need for financial institutions to provide information and be transparent about their internal workings. So when there is an allegation, there'll always be allegations coming from all manner of quarters. What is important is how you respond to that, what information you then make available to the public about your scoring, for example, about the lack of discriminatory practices and how you make sure that there are no discriminatory practices in how you sell your financial products, how you design them, how you deliver them, how you price them. And again, it talks to this issue of accountability and governance. These financial institutions, one of the things that we require as a regulator is that they've got well-to-do, knowledgeable people who are not employees of the financial institution, who are on their board, who provide oversight, who can check and test that what these financial institutions say they are able to do, in the kind of mechanisms that they have in place, for example, to avoid a situation where their internal workings lend themselves to discriminatory practices. And if those are in place and are properly communicated around to the public, I think the public can get a sense of confidence that there are structures which look after the interests of financial customers, in addition to the immediate interests of profit-making that financial institutions are looking after as well.
We've also heard the term the markets quite a lot this morning. And so who or what are the markets?
Well, I mean, it depends right on which type of market one is referring to. So I think in the context of the conversation in the conference, we were talking about foreign currency markets, for example, or domestic currency markets. There's also equity markets, bond markets in South Africa. It's where trading of instruments, financial instruments and financial assets takes place. And we are responsible, of course, as the FSCA, to provide a regulatory framework, the rules of the game, so to speak, within which those markets operate, and rules that govern the behavior of market participants. Market participants are subject to rules. Some of those rules pertain to what financial market infrastructure they use. So if you are a market participant in an exchange, there are exchange rules which pertain to you. If it is a settlement infrastructure, there are also rules that pertain to that settlement infrastructure. So those are the different definitions of markets. It's just platforms provided for people to buy and sell instruments, financial assets, depending on what those financial assets are.
From the work that you do, as we conclude, what sets... Because I'm tempted to ask the question, what sets South Africa apart? But then there's also the accusation that we have a sense of exceptionalism from the rest of the continent. But when you take a look at what South Africa is doing, and you look at what other markets on the continent are doing, what, are there similarities? Are there differences? What can we learn? What can everybody else learn from South Africa?
So I mean, South Africa has got the advantage, of course, of having deep and liquid capital markets. It is a small open economy, but I think in terms of our infrastructure, and I'm talking here about financial infrastructure, I think we've got some of the most sophisticated and advanced financial infrastructure. And this is something that investors look at in considering and making their capital allocation decisions. They want to be able to buy financial assets and to rely on the legal framework in terms of what their rights are. In case they have to enforce them, they also need to be able to sell those financial assets if they need to, and therefore that's the benefit of liquidity. But they also look at the regulatory framework, and I think South Africa has got very high levels of compliance or alignment to international standards when it comes to how the financial sector, the financial system, financial market infrastructures are regulated. All of those things, I think, together can be taken to explain the kind of competitive advantage that we have in terms of the rest of the continent. But of course, there'll always be things that we can learn from others, and we always look for opportunities of learning, whether it is in the rest of the continent or around the world, so that we can continuously improve and ensure that we have better competitive markets and a better competitive economy in general, and certainly our space, which is the financial sector.
How do we do that? We're also a country that has been grey listed.
Yes. So this is exactly why the issue of grey listing, and we mentioned this at the conference as well, is an urgent strategic issue for us to resolve. We are fully committed to the action plan that government has agreed to in terms of addressing the shortcomings that FATF has outlined for us. The action plan also talks to the timeline within which we must address those shortcomings, and we are very hopeful that we'll be able to do so by February 2025. That is the timeline. The follow-up assessment will then be mid next year.
That reputational cost, if you can explain it to our viewers, because essentially what does it mean? We are also dealing with a country where, like the governor had mentioned, our ports, our rail, our electricity, we're not all the way where we need to be.
Sure. So I mean, it's the cost of enhanced due diligence. If you are on the grey list, it means that our counterparts around the world have got to look much closely at transactions that pertain to South African entities, South African financial institutions. So it is specifically through the channel of transaction costs And transaction costs then have to be passed on to the end user, which is ordinary South Africans.
Mr. Gamlanat, thank you very much for your indulgence and for sharing your time with us here on Newzroom Afrika.
Not at all. Most welcome.